Well, Stephen here for Adslad TV, and I'm with Kieron Brady, an ex-footballer, but also a bit of an expert on diversity and prejudice.
I suppose it would all be encompassed within the field of equality, whether that was diversity, hate crime, prejudice, discrimination, etc. It's something that has in many ways been a great passion, something that was very much embedded within my upbringing in the East End of Glasgow. I come from an immigrant family, an Irish immigrant background, and I had a very early awareness of racism because it was something that impacted upon my community. And as a result of that, and as I touched on, coming from a family that would be very politicised, my mum was involved in organisations like Amnesty International. My uncles were involved in campaigning for the release of Nelson Mandela long before people here were fully aware of who Nelson Mandela was. So even when I came down here to play football professionally for Sunderland, I possessed a mindset that was very aware of social issues, not just in this country but further afield also.
Do you still have, because of that background, that upbringing, have you become that political persuasion as well? Would you say you've carried them through from your parents?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would be a very strong, fervent and profound proponent of the notion of equality and social justice. And I suppose where I am quite fortuitous is that I can utilise my footballing background at times to impress that upon young people in particular. I think, although I'm generally opposed to this perpetual promotion of footballers as role models, and the only reason I say that is because I think it's something that should be voluntary as opposed to something that is almost compulsory, but I certainly see responsibility within myself, particularly at 44 years of age, to try to impress upon the community about egalitarianism, about social justice, and not allowing yourself in any way to be inhibited by the fact that you might be, like myself, brought up in an area that is renowned for social and economic deprivation. I mean, I grew up in the East End of Glasgow, and as a result of that, prospects can be at a premium. But nevertheless, I still think, to quote Bob Marley, you can emancipate yourself from mental slavery, and you cannot allow various obstacles and barriers to confront you in a manner that will prove definitive in terms of your prospects.
Would you still say that there was a massive problem in society with inequalities, in fairness?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you take, for example, an issue like racism, it's something that's perpetual. Again, it's something that's very contemporary in light of what has befallen so many refugees who are trying to flee various parts of the world. But again, it's not restricted to an issue such as racism. I think when you consider matters such as sexism or homophobia, but not even that, I mean, you also have to factor in postcode prejudice. In this country itself, you know, many people would point to the great divide that exists between London and the home counties, and what exists further afield in places like Liverpool, Manchester, and of course the North East. So inequality is something that impacts upon people every single day. The real sadness is that a lot of people grow so accustomed to it that they become quite apathetic to it and no longer feel there's any merits in actually challenging it.
Yeah, I can understand that actually, and especially when you touch on the point of postcode prejudice, you can see that. So you see a divide, and the way I like to look at when I look at the world as a whole of the community, I look at it going forward and outwards. So the first thing what I look at is myself, and then I will look at my neighbour, and that's a community. Then from that community, you look at your housing estate. Like you says, the East End of Glasgow. You look at your housing estate where you're from. Then from there, you look at your town, and then from your town, you look at the North East. From the North East, the north of England, then United Kingdom, then Europe, then the world, and then the human race. You look onwards and upwards. I'm not one of them people who look the opposite way and then go backwards on myself, and then it just becomes just me at the other end of the journey. I like to look at everybody being, you start from this person, which is yourself, and you look forward and try and bring people together.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I think using a strategy such as that, you might be accused at times of not thinking big enough, but if you can help your neighbour when your neighbour needs it, then I don't believe that is something that anybody could decry you for, because it's taken me a long time to come to a conclusion that so much happiness can be sourced to your willingness to help your fellow human being. And even when I worked in anti-racism about a decade or so ago, that's something that I wasn't fully au fait with. But certainly since I stopped drinking, since I acknowledged I was an alcoholic, since I entered recovery, that's something that is incumbent upon me, because my sobriety and consequently my happiness and contentment is based upon my willingness to help not only my fellow human beings but my fellow alcoholics in particular, especially the ones that wish for some form of recovery. So in many ways it's all tied in, or I certainly sense common features within all of that.
When you were in that period 16 to 21 and you were playing football and you were touted as one of the next big names, I remember this, and did you feel that responsibility then? Did you realise, did you have a look around, did you realise did you acknowledge what you were going through then, or whatever was happening, you know, with the probably the stresses of fame or any type of things like that? Did you feel that then or not?
Not necessarily. I think when you're a professional footballer, and it might be the same in any form of sport, at that particular age, when you're not yet established, you can become quite selfish. Now, I don't personally see anything wrong with that if it's a good, productive type of selfishness, because in any vocation, any career, you are obviously wanting to try to establish yourself so that you can create some form of security and stability for yourself, or indeed yourself and your family. And again, I don't think anybody should be critical of you for that. It's only in latter years that I've probably sensed that there is an opportunity to be positive and productive, and to fully be aware that people, particularly young people, will listen to you and will take on board what you have to say. And to that end, it's something I've thoroughly enjoyed doing and something I hope to continue doing. But when between the ages of 16 and 21, you know, I had to retire at 21, and a lot of people would ask me, oh, it must have devastated you. And of course, in hindsight, it's something that did. When I think about myself as a person, there's probably part of me at times when I look back to some of the things I said and done during my time as a footballer that I probably wished I'd never been a footballer, simply because the culture that exists within the game can have a detrimental impact upon you as a person, I believe. But
with that's what I was trying to get to, is the fact that must have made the person that you are, though. That's what you're saying, the experience that you went through then, and probably then later on, like you said, you're a recovering alcoholic. All that might have had, all them things have played an interest or made up, or a point in your life and in your experience to build your personality and character.
Yeah.
One of the things what you said was that you felt like you had something to give back to your other recovering alcoholics, or help them people as well. And maybe as you look back at that time, even from 16 to 21, even when you said from the West End of Glasgow, did you say that? Or the East End of Glasgow. All that was a point to get to here.
Absolutely. Because funny enough, on the last day of my drinking, which was June the 12th.
Can you remember?
Any alcoholic would always tell you that they can recall their last ever drink, and the reason for that is because at that particular time most will be emotionally and mentally traumatised. Because
was that a challenge? Like, when you get to that point, and do you know that's a fight then?
Well, the thing is, you do, and many will tell you that in the last days of their drinking they're actually suicidal, and to that end I was no different. But from actually considering the realities of that day, when I was almost looking skywards and thinking, God, why are you doing this to me? Many people who I have became friends with in recovery have actually says, Kieron, when you think about how strong you feel now, how happy, contented you are, you can look back at that day and think, God, why were you doing this for me?
Yeah.
Because the strength that I think you've been alluding to is something that I would not have been able to acquire without various forms of adversity in life. And that's something that's not just applicable to alcoholics, it's something that would resonate within people right across society, irrespective of whether they're afflicted with any illness or not.
The other thing what I would like to just touch on there was when we're talking about equality and diversity or stigmas as well, which happen, when you said that most alcoholics feel suicidal, well, that's obviously a mental illness as well. It's like depression,
yeah.
And that is still a massive. I find, you must know yourself, it's a massive thing in society, mental illness, and that's still something what's not spoke about enough in a lot of situations, and a lot of people get to them parts in their life where they're so alone, they're depressed, but people still don't like talking about them type of things in sport, never mind society.
Yeah.
It's like a taboo subject. You've got a mental problem, that's something we don't speak about. You keep it to yourself, and that's something what I feel very strongly towards, that we should try and emphasise things like that as well. You know, trying to speak about mental health, because that is a major issue in society, and that must have been something what you felt like you said, you felt low, you felt, God, why am I, what's this, and you were questioning yourself whether, whether it was right to be here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and I think this is particularly relevant of males, but it would also be applicable, of course, to females, is that our culture sadly indoctrinates us into believing that we should measure masculinity from the neck down. And sadly what that means is that people are reluctant then to come forward and say things like, I am scared, I need help, I am an alcoholic, I am suffering from depression, etc., etc. And because of that culture, sadly, it does lead to people sadly taking their own life or contemplating self-harm. And again, working within the field of alcoholism, it's something that I am only too happy to try to assist with. I mean, I'm always at pains to point out to alcoholics that if they are suffering from mental illness in the traditional sense, then it would be advisable to speak with someone that is well versed and knowledgeable within that particular area. But you're right in what you say. It's a damning indictment on society that we've created this culture where people, both male and female, but I would say particularly males, feel somewhat reticent about sitting down with someone else and sharing their emotions, because they're only too happy to tell you about the fights in life that they've won.
Yeah, that's correct.
They are sadly reluctant or have great reservations about saying, there's something I'm confronted with in my life at this particular moment that I'm finding great difficulty in overcoming. And if we can engender people with greater confidence, then they will consequently feel empowered, and hopefully you will be able to reduce the figures around suicide, self-harms, etc. But you know, in the first year of my recovery, I was very reluctant to say to people I was an alcoholic. I would always skip round the periphery of it by saying, I might have a little bit of a problem, but that word, alcoholic and alcoholism, does have a stigma in many ways. You don't have to convince people, because so many of the organisations that deal with such issues do have a great degree of privacy and anonymity around them. But nevertheless, I feel stronger now than I have, more stronger now than at any point in my life. And that's nothing to do with physicality, it's all to do with everything from the neck up. And if you can sort of pass that message on, as it were, then
the whole message and all of it.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, an alcoholic's not a bad person trying to become good, they're a sick person trying to get better. But you could never ever disregard the fact that when you're in that illness, as I was and so many others have been, you do engage in acts and words that have a sad, tragic and at times deadly effect on the people around you, or indeed the alcoholic themselves. So, you know, recovering from alcoholism does not guarantee you happiness, but what it does do, I believe, is it gives you the strength to deal with adversity as and when it comes, because that's dealing with life. You know, life does throw people curveballs.
If you can turn a negative situation into a positive one,
absolutely,
that's what you got to do. And some people do say that failure is just success turned inside out. It's just opposite. It's a fine line. It's
absolutely. And the whole notion of gratitude or appreciation at times is based on the knowledge that at times in life we will go through periods of adversity, and in order to appreciate and show gratitude for the good times, you have to experience when life is bad.
You wouldn't appreciate the sun if it wasn't for the rain.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can we finish up?
Yeah.
I was going to say, can we finish off with something a bit more upbeat as well? Can you? No, it was all brilliant, obviously, because it's Ads Lad TV. But just for some people who may remember you, what was one of your favourite games that you ever did for Sunderland? What you pick up a memory from something?
I suppose playing for Sunderland when I scored my opening goal for the club, because the overwhelming majority of the time that I actually played for Sunderland, I was still eligible to play for the youth team at the club, which should in many ways illustrate just how youthful and naive and green I was. But the game against West Ham, when I scored my opening goal and managed to lay on another two and have a part in another goal, is something that will always stay with me. And what in ways compounds that happiness is the fact that it seems to have been very well received by supporters, and whenever I speak to Sunderland fans, that seems to be the first item on the agenda in terms of what we discuss. So it's something, of course, that would stay with any professional footballer when they're playing their opening game, certainly when they score their first goal. So to that end, then the West Ham game would always have incredibly favourable memories. So
I'm sure there's many more memories what we'll have.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
absolutely.
Thanks for that, Kieron Brady.
No problem at all.
It was brilliant, that.